The worst aspect is that some scientists attempted to suppress Velikovsky's ideas.
Hello all, and welcome to another episode of Hangar 412, the show that gives you the rundown on all the lore and technology behind some of our favorite vehicles in fiction. And in this very special episode, we'll be commemorating the 30th anniversary of the end of the Belkan War by remaking my first lore video on this channel, covering the Belkan Munitions 335 Lindwurm, the very bomber the Belkans chose to participate in the infamous 7 nuclear detonations on June 6, 1995, that mark the unofficial end of the Belkan War.
One of the saddest lessons of history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. Little interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power, you almost never get it back.
The Belkan Munitions Model 335 Lindworm was developed when the Belkan Government placed an order to the South Belkan Munitions Factory for a long-range nuclear-capable strategic subsonic bomber, right around the end of the 1940s. This was in response to the continuous and reoccurring conflicts between Belka and her southern neighbor, and the need to upgrade her bomber force to compete in these conflicts. With bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-29 Super Fortress already starting to show their age, and aircraft like the YB-52 Strato Fortress and Tu-95 Bear already starting test flights, Belka desperately needed a new bomber of their own to upgrade their aging bomber fleet. But the Belkan Munitions Factory, not being a stranger to plagiarism, took many design cues from preceding and competing aircraft of the era.
Look at that wreckage. I'm amazed they're still making them like this.
Hey?
This looks like a standard fighter jet, but it's actually different. They've done a lot of things to reduce the number of parts and cut down manufacturing costs, without sacrificing the plane's strength and performance. Very cost-effective. You could make 3 planes for the price of 2 this way.
Yes, I know Belka does operate B-52s alongside the BM-335, but the BM-335's whole thing is it was strictly domestically made. We don't know where the B-52 comes from in the Ace Combat universe, but we do know that the BM-335 was specifically designed and built within Belka. Early on, you can tell that the Belkan Munitions Factory used the Tu-95 Bear as clear inspiration, at least around the cockpit, for the 335. However, as the design got more refined and as time went on, the cockpit began to resemble that more of the cockpit seen on the B-29 Super Fortress. And good choice on the Belkans, because the B-29 has the single coolest cockpit of any airplane ever, hands down. Shut up, don't argue with me, I'm right. And I mean, even George Lucas would agree, because where do you think the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon came from? Yeah, it's a B-29. Of course, most Star Wars fans know that. That's not really that big a revelation. One of the most unique design aspects of the BM-335 is its unique dual-cylinder fuselage design. This is the result of the housing for the absolutely massive Nightingale or Knockingale night radar bombing system. This housing seems to also have been extended backward to act as a bomb bay as well. This would also seemingly increase the amount of bombs the aircraft could carry, as it could carry them both within the main fuselage on top and the second cylinder underneath as well. And why is the Nightingale night bombing radar system so large? Well, now remember, this is what nighttime bombing looked like during Belka's previous war. Just tossing bombs all over the place. And as most people know, technology tends to start out quite large and then get smaller with refinement in time. I mean, just look at cell phones and computers, for example. So it actually makes quite a lot of sense that this very early, one of the first nighttime bombing radars of the Strange Real Universe would be so big that it would need to be housed in its own fuselage, essentially. Another very distinct feature of this aircraft is its 4 absolutely massive and rather unique cigar-looking jet engines. Now, there's no lore on these engines at all, but my game theory is this. Since the BM-335 is one of, if not the very first jet-powered bomber produced by Belka, it is likely that its engines are descendants of the Junkers Umo 004B turbine engines that were used on the Me-262. The Me-262, of course, being the world's first operational jet fighter. Now, you would think that who developed the first jet fighter would be one of the most important pieces of lore in Ace Combat, you know, the jet fighter game. But here's the interesting bit. I remember reading on the wiki that was Osea back in the 1940s. And I remember this because while I was doing research for a piece of fan art that I still have on my DeviantArt page today, I wanted to get everything right. So I go to the wiki, I do the research. It said Osea made the first jet fighter, so that would have to be the Me-262, and so that's what I did my fan art on. But when I follow the link to the wiki for that piece of information that I had attached to my fan art, it's not there anymore. So, did something change or am I crazy? But I swear to Rosgrees, I read on the fandom page that in the 1940s, Osea developed the first jet fighter. But now there's no information on who developed anything. Anyway, back on topic and outside my craziness. If we move towards the rear of the plane, we can see another one of its most distinct features, its 4 vertical tail fins. Now, I'm not an aerospace engineer, so I don't want to speak with confidence and say I absolutely know what these 4 vertical fins are for, but I would imagine they're for extra stability and added maneuverability. That's my guess. And located behind the 4 tail fins is the bomber's last distinct feature, its remotely operated tail gun, very similar to those found on the B-36 Peacemaker at the time as well. I'm sure Belkan bomber crews were freaking elated to have this on their craft. Instead of having to sit completely exposed in some kind of ball turret or glass box and be shot at by the enemy, you could safely operate the turret from the safety of the cockpit. Though, just like with the jet engines, there's absolutely zero lore on this gun at all. So if I had to make an educated guess on what this gun is or what it's meant to be, I would say it's either a 50 caliber machine gun or our favorite friend from the channel that we cannot seem to escape from, the 22mm 6-barreled M61 Vulcan cannon. If you've been watching my channel a while or seen any of my past lore videos, that gun should seem very familiar to you because it shows up in almost all of my lore videos, at least on Ace Combat planes. So those are all the most distinct features of the plane. I mean, essentially in game, it functions as a reskinned B-52 for the most part. So this is everything that sets it apart from its counterpart there. As for other weaponry, it is a bomber, so we do know it is capable of carrying traditional iron bombs. What specific make and model of bomb, we do not know. And the same is true for its nuclear capabilities. We do not know what make and model or scale of bomb it is capable of carrying, although we'll get into that more specifically a little bit later. But with Belka's biggest conflict after the development of the BM-335 being simply just suppressing a pro-democracy uprising in the region known as Recta, which would later secede, but we'll get into that later, the thought of nuclear war and the need for a nuclear-capable bomber for such a scenario faded quickly from people's minds. And the bombers were then refitted to be AWACS aircraft, electronic warfare aircraft, and spy planes. Though it is unknown what any of these aircraft would look like because the only time the BM-335 is ever depicted is in some concept art and in the game where it's only depicted either way as its standard bomber variant. though the electronic warfare versions of the aircraft seem to be the most popular fan depiction of the aircraft, oddly enough. However, in the 1980s, Belka's southern neighbor Osea launched a successful scheme to further cripple the Belkan economy and sow further discourse within Belka's borders. This left Belka with no other option than to retaliate against Osea and her allies that had sought to and successfully schemed to destroy the Belkan economy and sow further discourse within her borders, as I previously mentioned. So, on March 25th, 1995, Belka launched an invasion of almost every country of which she shared a border, mostly allies of Osea and Osea itself, though leaving almost all of her previously owned territories that had seceded, such as Gibet and Rekta, completely unoccupied, though oddly enough trying to reoccupy all of Ustio and only just barely failing to, marking the beginning of the end of the Belkan War. This turning point in the war would be one of only 2 sorties that we know the BM-335 was called out on during the entirety of the Belkan War. The first of these 2 sorties we know that the BM-335 was definitely called out on took place on April 2nd, 1995, after Belka had occupied almost all of Ustio, leaving only the Tyran mountain range and Valais Air Base unoccupied at the time. So the Belkans launched what they thought would be their final decisive operation to capture Valais Air Base and effectively bring all of Ustio back under Belkan control once again. To accomplish this goal, Belka launched an absolutely massive formation, an aluminum cloud, so to speak, of B-52s, BM-335s, an XB-70, F-117, and several escort fighters in an attempt to assault the base and wipe it off the map once and for all. Something small I noticed while doing research for this video was the formation of the Belkan bombers themselves, and how that hints at the possible strategy the Belkans were using to overtake Valais Air Base. So, for my theory to make sense, let's look at how the formation was arranged. First, we have that little F5 leading the formation, which leads me to believe he was either a scout or meant to go soften up the air defenses before the bombers got there. Then we have the bombers themselves, led by a formation of mainly B-52s, 7 of which, I believe. Then, nearly at the rear of the formation, we have the BM-335s at a slightly but noticeably higher altitude than the B-52s. Then, along with the other escort fighters, we do have one XB-70 that appears and an F-117. So, my guess for the Belkan battle strategy is this, and you can correct me and leave your own theories down below if you want. Please do, it drives engagement. What it looks like to me is the B-52s were meant to lead the charge and do most of the destruction, hopefully wiping out the base in maybe 1 or 2 passes. Now, with the BM-335s being at the rear of the formation at a slightly higher altitude, and there only being 4 of them, leads me to believe that the BM-335s were employed as a sort of backup, just in case maybe the B-52s were wiped out. Maybe these BM-335s could be above the ceiling for those air defenses that might wipe out the B-52s. So, in short, if the B-52s were flying low enough to be shot down, maybe the BM-335s would be at a high enough altitude to where those air defenses couldn't reach them, and they could still complete their mission. Then you have the XB-70, which leads me to believe he was also a backup in case all the subsonic bombers were shot down. Maybe he could come in, hit the base before they could react, or outrun any air defenses that, again, would have shot down the BM-335s and B-52s. Then you have the singular F-117 towards the middle of the formation, which leads me to believe that he was hiding out in that formation, like as a final last resort. If the air defenses managed to shoot down the B-52s, BM-335s, and XB-70, maybe this F-117, being a stealth bomber, could slip through the enemy air defenses and do some damage to the base. And that's why I also think he was more in the middle of the formation, That way, it's like using chaff or decoys, where the enemy air defenses, in this case the Ustio air defenses, are going to see all the B-52s, BM-335s, the other fighters, the XB-70s show up on radar clear as day, but they'll have no idea that he's hiding amongst them, like a needle in a haystack. Anyway, that's just my little goofy theory I came up with. Maybe I'm looking too far into it, maybe I've come to the wrong conclusion, maybe none of this matters at all, but I just thought it was kind of fun. It just kind of hit me while I was looking at the briefing screen while working on the animation of the bombers flying over the mountain range. I was like, huh, that's kind of interesting that the formation is set up like this in particular. Wonder if that means anything. And then it just got my mind going. But if any of you have any other ideas, definitely leave them down below. I would love to read them. Honestly, I would. Maybe your theory implies some lore I never thought about. I don't know. I just like reading that stuff. However, the entire Belkan bomber formation was wiped out by mercenaries operating on behalf of the Ustio government that had been scrambled from Valais Air Base to defend it from the Belkan assault. This failed operation by the Belkans to wipe Valais Air Base off the map, as I mentioned, marked the beginning of the end of the Belkan War, as this is when the tide started to turn for the Allied forces against Belka. And poetically enough, the only other operation we know the BM-335 took place in was the unofficial end of the Belkan War itself. If you ask any Ace Combat fan any date in the franchise that they can recite by heart, because it is the most infamous date in the entire lore, that answer will be
June 6th, 1995.
Because on June 6, 1995, at around 1330 to 1400 hours, which would be 1:30 p.m. to 2 p.m., a squadron of 9 BM-335 Lindworm bombers would take off from an unknown base in Nord-Belka to carry out the mission they had originally been designed for all those years ago. Helmed by those only most loyal to Valdemar Rald's Fatherland Workers' Party, were tasked with dropping nuclear weapons on their own soil in sparsely populated areas along their southern border.
At the end of the last war, I was assigned the mission of dropping a nuclear weapon on a city in my own country.
In a last-ditch, scorched earth attempt to push the Allied forces out of Belka and further prevent them from possibly reaching Nord-Belka, which is the Holy Land of Belka, where many far-right Belkans believe is the birthplace of the Belkan race. And what a lot of historians fail to realize is the Belkans' far-right ideology was more of a religion than anything else, as they believed this Nord-Belka to be their Holy Land. The same way the Nazis in our universe believed that the island of Thule was their Holy Land. In the same way, let's say, that the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Islam, Catholicism, and Christianity all believe that Jerusalem is their holy site. And personally, I don't know why we're fighting over some friggin' island in the north covered in snow most of the year, most likely, and some crappy desert that's really only good for growing olives. I don't know about you, but I think people should be fighting over California. I mean, it's got everything. It's got desert, it's got forest, it's got beach, it's got snowy mountaintops. It's got everything you could ever want. It's got farmland. So, to me, California is my holy land. That's what I'm gonna die and fight for. I just wish they would get their crap together, that's for sure. Now it makes sense why the Belkans would do such a thing as to nuke themselves and create a radioactive nuclear no man's land to protect what they deem holy. So, to many of the ideologically driven Belkans, by no means at all could they let the Allied forces
desecrate it with their filthy footsteps.
It was heresy.
Back on topic though, here's where things get really muddy for probably the single most important piece of Ace Combat lore. And you'd think it would be clearer than this. As if the specific canon to Ace Combat Zero can't get confusing enough, especially with the mercenary, soldier, and knight timeline where you meet different pilots. Which one is the canon one? Which pilots actually ran into you at the round table? And it doesn't seem like there's a specific canon to how things played out on June 6, 1995. Like, at all. Like, there's basic story beats, but whether or not you shoot down the bombers changes nothing. You shoot down all 9 bombers, the 7 nuclear bombs still go off.
All planes confirmed down. We did it! There's no impossible jobs for us mercenaries. Freedom and we, Falcons. What the?
You don't shoot them down at all, still only 7 nuclear bombs go off.
No, we're too late. Don't be stupid. Nukes won't solve a thing.
All planes, something strange is happening. The bombers are withdrawing.
And the dialogue says the bombers are breaking formation, which they don't do, and then they just vanish after the bombs go off. So did they explode? What happened? Were they vaporized by the bombs? What happened? So my little headcanon is this. Ground forces had already set up the 7 nuclear bombs on the ground, and the bombers were either there to drop additional bombs along with the other nuclear bombs that were set up on the ground, or they were actually, as your AWAC says, on course to deliver nuclear weapons within Ustio and possibly Osea. Maybe even act as decoys, possibly. As I mentioned earlier, I was going to get more into the specifics of what specific nuclear bomb the BM-335 could carry. And from my understanding, the nukes that went off on June 6, 1995 were V1 nuclear warheads, the predecessor to the V2, which is a whole other thing we'll get into in some other video. That with the knowledge that it doesn't matter what you do, if you shoot down the bombers or not, still 7 V1 tactical nuclear bombs detonate. It would lead me to believe that, yes, the bomber was carrying some form of the Belkan V1 tactical nuke. So, that's all the lore we got on this neat little NPC. It's funny how there actually is, even though there isn't a lot of lore, you can still glean a lot, simply from just this little tiny, low poly NPC model from a 20-year-old game. If you had as much fun listening to or watching this video as I did remaking it, don't forget to drop a V1 tactical nuke on that subscribe and bell icon. And definitely hit that like button while you're at it, and leave a comment down below, maybe a suggestion for another video. I have a whole batch of videos I'm getting ready to make, but I'm definitely going to need some more suggestions and ideas after that, for sure. So, definitely chime in down below. And until next time, dudes and dudettes, trust is vital in a peaceful world. And in order for that to happen, you've got to stop thinking that just because the color of someone's skin or where they're from or what their political ideology is, that they're untrustworthy and somehow out to get you. When most of the time, they just want to go have a hot dog and watch some bullcrap show that Netflix forces down your throat. Just like anybody else.
I also worry of an America in our children's and grandchildren's time, with the United States as a service and information economy, with nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues. When the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledge to be questioned those in authority. We're clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes. Our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true. We slide, almost without noticing, back into superstition and darkness. The dominantly influential media, with 30-second sound bites. Countdown to 10 cents sounds the less. Most common denominator programming. Credulous persons on pseudo-shams and superstition, but especially a connoisseur of ignorance.